Because the idea that libertarianism is something very new is widespread, and as you heard from Boudewijn's lecture, the basic ideas have been around for a very long time, and if there is now a feeling that libertarianism is something quite new, it is probably the probable reason is that it went into an eclipse in recent history, and there is an urge to revive it. So I'm a philosopher. I stay away from politics as much as I can, so I do not have empathy with your ambitions at all. Nevertheless, I think politics, if you abstract from the wheeling and dealing and the discussions and the posturing and so on, politics has something to do with the general order of human life and human interaction. And that is, of course, a topic that is very much imbued with philosophical ideas. Now, the philosophy of natural law is, to some extent, the philosophy of libertarianism. Although the word libertarianism is new, the traditional, in the political sense, the philosophical sense of libertarianism is really the doctrine of free will. Right? And one of the basic notions of libertarianism is the focus on the human person as a being of reason and free will. And that is, of course, the traditional, indeed, the classical notion, classical in the European sense, that is, it goes back to the beginning or the re-emergence of civilization in Europe, the period which Boudewijns talked about, the Middle Ages, which was not just interesting for its cities, but also because it had an astoundingly fruitful intellectual life. And I can imagine that few of you have read medieval philosophers or theologians, but they are not primitive thinkers. And indeed, most of their thinking is absolutely beyond the grasp of much of modern philosophy in a very specific sense, namely the willingness to go deep, right, and to explore. I have this block of text with two headings, rational animal and equality of natural rights for all humans. Both are, in fact, ideas that have been developed mainly in the Middle Ages and became central to the flourishing of European civilization at that time. One element that has been lost, or at least lost sight of, is the first one, what I call here the human commons of reason and logic, and distinguish that from the common denominators, that is, things that we all have, but we do not have them in common. We all have eyes, right? So that's a common denominator. We all have a stomach, unless it's taken away, but we all have these things, so these are common denominators of human beings. We all have beliefs, opinions, but there is no eye common to every person. There is no stomach common to every person, and there are very few, if any, beliefs or opinions that are common to every person. However, if you go to the human, what I call the human commons of reason, you come in the field of logic, mathematics, science, ethics, and these are the traditional fields where people say, well, you cannot be speaking seriously if you think you have your own logic or your own science, or your own ethics. All these things have to be common or they're worth nothing. They're valueless. If you think, I'm a scientist and I have science, but nobody else does, there are special institutions for them, for such people. They put them away. If you do not share in this commons of reason, then you are a lunatic. The second basic principle, the equality of natural rights for all humans, is also an idea that we got in the Middle Ages. And when we say the Middle Ages, I refer, of course, to the fact that the Middle Ages had one undisputed basic system, an ideology, if you wish, but it was really the Christian faith, and this was common to all people, and it made it possible for everybody to, as it were, discuss things within a common framework. You did not have to have the idea that you can simply dismiss people, because everybody had certain opinions and convictions in common, not only about the human commons of reason, but also the notion that there is in the human world, among human relations, there's absolutely no place for an absolutely superior human authority. Ultimate authority is transcendent. It transcends, it's transcendent relative to the human world. And that implies that all inequalities of rights are, in a way, artificial. They are not natural. So they cannot ever found arguments that are ultimate or decisive. Right? Every notion of equality of all human beings in the West developed in the Middle Ages from this notion that the final cause and the final end are all beyond the grasp of human beings. If you take this transcendent aspect away, you end up with what is called the immanentization, making all these ultimate things immanent in the human world. But if you look at the history of ideas, then you end up with the progressive notion, or utopian notions, that we can achieve utopia, we can determine all things, we can make the world as we wish it to be. This sort of thinking rises then to the fore, but of course the dangerous word in all this is we. Right? It is never we, because it's always someone who makes the decision and the others are willy-nilly expected to swallow the verdict of the authorities, whether they are scientists or politicians or whatever. So the idea that ultimate authorities and ultimate causes and ultimate ends are not in this world but are beyond it is very fundamental to the notion that there are equal rights for everybody, because everyone is at the same distance from the measure, right? Whereas if you put it in the world, some people will say, I am the measure, and you are being measured. And that makes, of course, a very modern, for a very modern politics, but it is not the image of politics from which libertarianism arose. Now, the human commons of reason means, of course, that the equality among people constrains the natural right. There is, contrary to the suggestion in the book, the absolute natural rights, which I'm set to defend in the book, and which I do, but it is absolute only within the human sphere, person to person. I'm not saying that you can invent that you have a right to deny logic and so on, the right to deny truth. Right? that would be very contrary to my approach. But the combination of the commons of reason and the common denominators which make for our differences add an element not just of theoretical reason and argumentation, but also of personal responsibility and liability. This is where you have to explain yourself or come up with the reasons for your action, not just abstract considerations. For the Western tradition, this developed into this very peculiar notion of a court of law that we have and still have, although the reality is, and has always been very different, that is that a court of law is a place where people present their arguments in a, as it were, secluded environment where there are no outside pressures, no particular interests that are at work, and where both parties are given equal opportunity to state their case, and the judge is expected to judge on the basis of the arguments presented by the parties. So what I would like to say is that this idea of the human person is fundamental to the natural law tradition, and if there had not been this natural law tradition, which was, as it were, very much in force for over 6 centuries, there would never have been room for a liberal or libertarian tradition to develop. And if you look at more recent history, you see that when the decline of the natural law tradition is matched by a decline of the liberal tradition in Europe. That is when this notion that everything is immanent in the human world, there is no beyond where you can have a, as it were, an objective distance equal for all persons. There is no fixed reference point. When that notion begins, then we enter the 20th century with its numerous projects. Actually, it began at the end of the 18th century in France with the numerous projects of creating a new man, where many people felt rather uncomfortable being made into new men. So in the 19th century, this natural law tradition and the liberal tradition that goes together with it went into a decline, and the most common reasons cited are the rise of a peculiar cult of science called scientism, which is the idea that if you do like the scientists do, you cannot do wrong. But of course the science at that time, that was the Newtonian science, right? And that was the science of the heavens, the heavenly bodies, the movements of the planets and so on. What scientism did was to apply this cult of science to the what we now call the human sciences or the humane sciences, which had as corollaries that the materialism and the notions that the human being is simply a body, right, rose to the fore, and everything had to be reduced to, as it were, matter in interaction. Then evolutionism was added to the mix, saying that all these traditional notions like free will, reason, God, natural law, natural rights, and so on, they are all delusions. And the problem was then that your philosophy became very poor.